If you're new to property and wonder if there's a strategy that you can start with a little rather than have a deposit to buy a house, I'm sure you heard about the rent. But wait, until you just skip the video, most people just know one type of rent. And in this video, I'm going to share with you 4 different types of rent and the 4 different type of models of rent that you might not even consider or you might not know. And sometimes rent pull people off because they do not want to manage properties. And in this video, I'm going to share with you one of the models that you don't even need to manage the tenants yourself. And this is the closest you have as a passive income when it comes to rent. So what is rent? Rent is when you take a property from a landlord and you're going to manage the property by guaranteeing the landlord the rent. Because the landlord doesn't have to manage the property, this can be quite attractive proposition for them. And the difference between a landlord will use a rent provider or use a estate agent is that most estate agents do not guarantee rent, whereas when you are doing rent, you're going to guarantee the landlord the rent. Now, there's a lot of people saying that these strategies might not be good because you don't own the property, you just manage someone else's property rather than buying the property yourself. However, if you are considering to do rent is because you might not have the money for the deposit to build your portfolio. So starting with the rent might be a good solution for you to start in your property journey. Also, if you're looking for a strategy that is more recurring type of strategy, it might be a good solution for you. But as I mentioned in the beginning, in this video, there are 4 types of rent model. And if you're not doing rent because you heard just one type of model, in this video, I'm going to share with you 4 different types, and then you can see if the rent strategy is the type of strategy you wanted to do. Now, you should consider rent when you are looking for a more steady stream of income. If you're looking for more recurring stream of income, this strategy might be a good strategy for you to start with. Now, if you're new to the property and you don't know which strategy to choose from, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a video in the description where I'm going to work you through different type of strategies that you can choose if in case you wanted to start in property. Now, what are the different type of rent? So the first one I will call a traditional HMO rent. This is where you get a large property and instead of you renting the whole house, you're going to be renting room by room. This is going to allow you to get more rent from the property because if you think you can pay the landlord a fixed rent and then you're going to rent out individual room and pay the bills and keep the remaining money. This is quite a popular rent strategy model that most people know about. So that is going to be the first type of rent. The second model is service accommodation, where this model is a bit different as you're going to get the property and you're going to be listing this property in Airbnb or Booking.com or in a corporate house platform. This allows you to charge per night rather than charge per month, potentially generate a much higher return. The model number 3 is manage someone else's property. It's kind of very similar to letting agents. What you're going to do, you're going to manage your property and they're going to pay 15 to 20% fee. This is a low risk but also offers a lower return compared to other models. So now we're going to see the last model, and this is the model I said you might not need to manage the property yourself. So the last model is going to be rent to social housing provider. So here what you're going to do, so you take the property from the landlord, you give to the house association, and what they're going to do, they're going to have a contract, they're going to guarantee a rent. You're going to have much lower management because they are going to be the one to manage the property. This can be a great rent model. In this model, you have a lower management requirement and you have a great security because normally you're going to sign a contract with the council around 3 to 5 years contract. The key is to understand what is the model that works for you the best. So you have 4 of them, and if you don't really like, you might do rent social house provider. That it can be a good strategy as well. So now, does rent works everywhere? So the question is, it depends which type of rent you like to do. So you need to do different type of due diligence to find if the rent works in your area. If you pick one rent model and if it doesn't work in your area, you can try another area nearby. So let's say if you live in Chelsea and it doesn't work in Chelsea, you can try another area nearby Chelsea to see if the rent works. So here's how you do your due diligence to understand if the rent works in your area. So if we take, for example, rent to service accommodation, here's what you need to check. You need to check hotels nearby. You need to check tourist attraction, transport hubs, and hospitals. And also you want to check business in the area. When you're doing your due diligence, focus on hotels, because if you think hotels have done already their due diligence, no hotel will be open in an area without have done their due diligence. So they've done. So if you have hotels in your area, that means you might have a good spot for you to do rent to service accommodation. And remember, some hotels don't tend to advertise in booker.com. So what you wanted to do instead, you wanted to use Google Maps and see what are the hotels nearby in your area. Now, for a traditional HMO rent due diligence, here is what you need to do. You wanted to use websites like Spare Room to see if there's demand in your area. If you see a lot of rooms to rent, that means you have demand. So also what you could do, you could download the HMO license in the council website to see if there is a lot of landlords registered. This will be giving you a sense if there's a good demand for rent as well. So now, if in case you wanted to do number 4, social housing provided, you need to call the council and check out if the council are looking for accommodation. This is one of the steps you need to do. You also can use a website called Home Finders UK to see if they are looking for houses there. So this can be a good indicator that there is a demand for social housing properties, and these are the steps that you need to do your due diligence. After we've done the due diligence, now what we need to do, we need to understand what's going to be the cost for you to start your rent business. Now, depending on which model you're going to choose, the cost will vary. However, I'm going to give some guidelines just as example. So initial setup costs. So you need to open your company. In order for you to open your company, it's going to cost around £13. What you could use a company called Company Made Simple, for example. Also, you're going to need a company bank account. Normally it's free, so you don't need to pay anything. Now, you're going to have public liability insurance and professional insurance. It's around 300 to 500 per month. You're going to have a website as well. It's around £10. You can use Squarespace. Also, you're going to have professional pictures taken, around 80 to 150 pounds. And also, you're going to give to the landlord at least 1 month's rent and also 6 weeks deposit. Normally that's what the landlord wants. A property normally will cost 1,000 to 3k, depends on the spec that you wanted to go. First month's bill was going to be around 200 to 400 per property, and then maybe the total of all of these is going to be around 2k to 5k depending on the furniture and also the spec of the property. However, if you like to reduce these costs, what you could do, you could find properties that are already furnished and you just need to negotiate the terms. Yeah, so that's one of the things you can do to reduce the costs. So next, what we need to do, how we can find the deal. And this can be one of the biggest challenges for most people. How do they find the deal? So I'm going to give you some steps for you to find your first deal. So the first step is I want you to create a script and use consistently. Why? Because most people, they don't have a script. When they call the estate agent, they are not consistent. If you have a script, it will help you to be more consistent. Now, depending on the rent model you use, you can find numbers, for example, on Spare Room, or you can call letting agents directly. When you talk to them, never say, for example, rent. Never use the word rent, or never use the word, for example, service accommodation. They have a bad connotation to these two words. You want to use different terms. Instead, you can say company-led or corporate accommodation terms instead. Step number 2, view properties. So what you need to do, normally you wanted to build a rapport. You wanted to go and see these properties. You want to build a rapport. You want to explain this model, the rent model in the end. You say, of course, corporate let, but in this point, if you think they already spend 30 to 45 minutes with you, they will be more likely to listen. Now, step number 3, you're going to be focused on the benefits to them to guarantee them a rent for 3 to 5 years. They're not going to have any void period. The property will be maintenance in a high spec. You're going to be handle all the minor maintenance, and then also you're going to just let these properties to a professional tenants. This is going to compel the landlord to say yes, because if you see, you're going to be looking after the property. So step number 4, I'm going to give you a tip that might change everything. Instead of you just offer a normal rent, what you could do, you could offer above asking rent. So what do I mean by that? Let's say the landlord wants X amount, you could offer 100% £100 more. This is going to make the landlord think that you're more serious, and also the landlord is going to start seeing you differently. Now, these are £100. You think like, oh my God, is a bit more. However, you might be able to get more property because you are giving more than the landlord is expecting. Now it's time for you to start scaling. As soon as you start getting a couple of properties, I'm going to explain to you what are the steps for you to scale. So once you have your first profitable property, it's time for you to start systemize everything. So the first and the third month, the perfect thing you should do, you should document everything that you've done during these first and 3 months. Then the months 4 to month 6, what you're going to be doing, you're going to be adding properties into your portfolio. Month 7 to month 12, that is where you start scaling for more properties. You start hiring also a virtual assistant. You don't want it to be doing everything. You want it to virtual assistant to do some of the work. When you reach 10 properties, let's say on average you are profiting 800, so you have 10, you are kind of monthly, you have 8 grand. Now you have a very good solid business, and also you're going to start putting systems, processes in place. Also what you could do, you could have an operator, okay, operator. But before you hire operator, you need to make sure that you document all the procedures, and also you have onboarding to make sure when you have a virtual assistant or operator to manage your portfolio that they know exactly what they need to do. Now, before we finish this video, I just wanted to say one of the biggest mistakes that kills the rent business. I want just to go through this mistake so you don't make it yourself. No breaking clause. Always negotiate at least 6 months breaking clause. Very important. Also, you need to make sure that you are getting the right type of properties. Depending on the model that you're going to choose the right type of properties to do the rent. And number 3, make sure that you have automation. Use systems. There are lots of systems that you can use that requires you to do very little, and you systemize the whole business. So these are the 3 mistakes you should avoid. Have a clause, make sure that you use systems, and make sure that you choose the right type of properties. These 3 mistakes, very important. Make sure that you avoid them. Rent strategy can be a good strategy for those who want to start in property. If you're looking for a more consistent type of strategy that give you a consistent cash flow, and of course, if in case you are doing self-accommodation, rent self-accommodation, it can be more volatile compared to a more traditional rent. So if in case you're doing self-accommodation, you might consider later on to diversify for a different type of model as well. So instead of you just do one, you do both type of models, one to give you more recurring and one to give you more cash flow. And if you set up your rent property with the system, it can be quite a powerful strategy for you to start in property. Now, after you start building your rent property, make sure that you start considering to start building your portfolio too, as you're going to become just financial free for a period of time, for the period that you have the rent. As soon as you give the properties back to the landlord, you're not financial free anymore. This is something that most people do not think when they start rent. So you should use some of the cash flow to save for deposits, so you start to build your own portfolio. Hope you see value in this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.